3, 2. All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour. I know that you all are going to have a lot of questions. I see some folks are warming up and writing in the chat box, and maybe some of you will turn your cameras on soon. But I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. I like to start by saying lots of crazy things going on in the world. It seems like the world's on fire. Everything's topsy-turvy. You could be doing anything else, but you're deciding to be with us. So let's participate. Let's really maximize this time that we have together. I know that some of you are probably multitasking as we speak, but I'm going to challenge you to be present and multitask a little later, or maybe, certain times throughout the chat if you need to, just so that we can have your presence. And if you want to chime in with any tips and tricks that you find helpful, or, you want to give some resources or just ask a question, you can be present and chime in, when that time allows. So turn your cameras if you feel called to do so. Come off mute when you want. I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise. But again, I can't stress, would love for you to hop off mute whenever you feel called to do so. If you do come off mute, you will show up in our live recording as this is being recorded. Again, going back to the multitasking thing, I would invite you to be present with us so that you can ask questions, and then later you can rewatch this video and you can take notes vigorously there and multitask to your leisure there. The last thing, well, I'll say a couple of things before the last thing. I would love for you all to write in the chat box. So if anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be held anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie. You can write to me privately, and I will keep your question or your reflection private and flag that to our guest speaker. And then now the last thing that I'll say is we'd love for you to follow us on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats that I have the pleasure. I don't have the pleasure of moderating all of them, but a good chunk of them, and it feeds my mind, and I get to talk with beautiful folks like the person I'm going to introduce in just a few moments. But before I pass the mic to our guest speaker, I just want to introduce myself for those of you who have not joined a Chat and Learn where I've moderated. So again, my name is Mariella Marie, super, super obsessed with speaking about emotional intelligence and the importance of emotional intelligence, especially in the workplace, and especially in these unprecedented times when we can really, develop our emotional intelligence and create, innovate, share, create real community and things like that. So I might bring some of our reflections to the emotional intelligence sphere. Feel free to philosophize with me or bring some data if you want. And then I'll invite folks as well to support the current project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. Would love for you all to go to thepositiveforceteam.org, sign up for our newsletter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat with you there. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker, Samaya. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today, Samaya.
Thank you so much for having me. And I got to know Power to Fly through a job board that my partner Christina and I created. So to give you some background, my partner Christina and I run a program called Ideate Labs, and our goal is to make UI UX design or digital design accessible to all, especially women, minorities, immigrants, people of color. And both of us have worked in the UI UX world for over 5 years now at startups, at agencies, consulting firms, in-house at large corporations, and we still don't see too much diversity. There's still not many people who look like us, and we'd like to change that. And so 6 months ago, we started this program, and we were thinking of ways that, we could have helped pivot into this career, or ways we could help others pivot into this career. And we did it on our own, and we failed and fell on our face thousands of times as we were pivoting. So this course was there to make sure that other people didn't make the same mistakes that we were making. And that's how Ideate Labs was born. And since then, it's grown into a really vibrant international community of over 3,000 designers on our Slack channel. And we're, actively recruiting for our fall cohort. And we have 11 amazing students that are currently graduating and are just about to pivot into a career in UI UX design. So that's me professionally, me on the emotional, spiritual side. I'm a cat lady. I also have a puppy. I run a little pet project called Positive, which is a little dog Tinder app just for fun. It's picking up slowly. And I like to mentor students at Wharton's Venture Lab. I like to dance and play acoustic guitar.
Awesome. Thank you for highlighting the emotional intelligence side of you. I love that. Music and, mentorship and, being creative. I find that that is something that hopefully will call for more, at least virtual circles to start like this until we can be in physical spaces more and we can inspire folks. I love what you all have created. And I know that your partner couldn't be here today, but we still have her presentation here. So can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yes, absolutely. So Christina is my counterpart. She's my better half, and she is currently unable to be here because she's about to give birth to her second, child, Luca, who's going to be my godson. So I'm really excited about that, and that's the reason she couldn't be here. But she's an actual mom. She's a really cool mom. She enjoys slow fashion, healthy cooking. You have to try some of her cooking. It's amazing. But besides that, she's also a professor at Drexel University, and she's founded a nonprofit organization, the Luca Oros Scholarship, to help folks in Ukraine achieve education. So she's amazing. She's worked in large corporations in UI/UX for over 4 years, and we've known each other for a very long time.
Awesome. Awesome. So before we get started with the questions, can you let us know how we can connect with you both in your projects offline, or I say offline, but I mean after this conversation, so that we can support the great work you all are doing? Feel free to give websites, socials, emails, whatever you want to give.
Sure, yeah, you could check us out at ideatelabs.co, and you can look us up on LinkedIn as well. So Christina runs the UI portion of our course. I run the UX strategy and research portion of our course, which is why we balance each other out in every way. And we'd both be happy to answer your questions respective to those roles.
Awesome. Great. So before we roll into these awesome questions that you all have submitted previous to this chat, can you go over the principal themes that you'll walk us through for the duration of the chat?
Sure, yeah. So we're going to talk about how to learn UI/UX design and how to pivot into a career in UI/UX design, as well as just playing to your strengths. So discovering who you are, what you want, what are your goals, and how you can position yourself and reframe some of your existing experiences into a UI/UX career, which is exactly what Khrys and I did.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to stop presenting here. And just before we go into the questions, I would love to gauge our audience, our live audience now. If you all could drop in the chat box, anything about yourselves and your with respect to your current journey. So anything you would like our guest speaker to know. Where are you? Are you currently pivoting? Are you thinking about pivoting? Have you pivoted and you're like, what did I do? How can I change? How can I pivot again? Let us know where you are in your career journey. Just drop it in the chat box and I'll flag that to our guest speaker so that she can really dive in deep on these questions you all have submitted. But let's take this first question here. If this is your question and you hear it, again, drop in the chat box, come off mute. If this is not your question, still want to hear from you. I'm going to sound like a broken record through the chat because I really want to hear from you all. So let's take this first question here. What type of background do you need to have to make this pivot? What entry-level skills are most UX companies looking for?
So really you can enter the UX field from any background. I started in mechanical engineering and then I dived into the startup world as a marketing associate and a customer success manager. And then that's how I used that role at the startup to pivot into a career in UX design. So it really, you can come from a variety of different backgrounds. We've noticed that a lot of graphic designers and content writers make great UI UX designers. This is, graphic designers tend to have that visual eye and they can always become amazing, brilliant UX designers. Content writers and, journalists and bloggers can become amazing UX strategists because they have that ability to communicate their thoughts and communicate the problem and showcase their process. So that is really crucial to writing website copy and copy for the platform, and that's a really great skill to have as well. Or you could come from a technical side. You could be a developer, you could be a data analyst, you could be a project manager, and those skills are crucial to taking on a strategy role. You might become a great UX engineer, being able to not only design the platform, but also code up the platform. Or you might become a great product manager because you've worked with development teams before and you're able to see through the end-to-end process and manage different teams to come together to build this product. So there's a lot of different ways you can get into UI UX design. Just keep in mind that this field is really young. It's about 50 years old. It's a new field. So it's really a melting pot of different perspectives. And the more we can have new and interesting perspectives, the better it'll be, the more innovative the products will become. So never feel that you don't have the right beginning to get into UI UX. You do.
I love that. I love that you're encouraging folks to, remember that this is a new, field, and that we need more diverse voices and perspectives to add to that and to enhance that. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I would love also, as folks are dropping in the chats, I love that folks are continuing to write about their journey in the chat box. I'm going to flag that to you in just a moment, but I would love to know more about your transition. So you said that before, you held a different role. Can you tell us a little bit about, those last moments of, what pushed you over the edge, or what even sparked your interest to want to make that pivot?
Yeah, so my parents are very traditional immigrants. And when I went from high school to college, they said, you can either become an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. Nothing else is allowed, because we don't believe you're going to be able to survive and sustain yourself through creative jobs. And I actually really wanted to be a musician. So I wanted to be a voice major, a whole other pathway. But I did what my parents told me. I became a mechanical engineer at Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the best schools for engineering. But I barely made it out of the school. I was, getting C's and D's and barely passing. And what I would do instead to boost my GPA was take music and writing and creative courses. And that's where I first discovered human computer interaction, because I met so many talented people who were working in Disney's Imagineering group, and who were doing a lot of things at the intersection of machine learning and creativity, and building these beautiful interactive digital products and physical products. And so that's where my interest first started. But of course, I didn't know how to get in at all. And I didn't even know how to present myself professionally at that point. So it took a lot of soul searching. 9 months later, I got my first startup job. But in between, in those 9 months, I was working on my resume. I was backpacking throughout Europe with my little sister. And I was just doing a lot of things to figure out who I was and where I fit into this world. I'm naturally a person who likes a little bit of everything. And maybe you are too, because that's what attracts a lot of UX folks into UX. It's being able to use your creative side, your logical, methodical side, your strategic side, and bring it all together in one job, which is why startups attracted me in the first place. And so startups, as a junior person, a junior professional, were easier to get into. There's a lot less barriers to entry. So I went on something called AngelList, and I started to DM all the founders of the companies and say, hey, I would love to start working with you. And that's how I got my first job. And it was as a customer success manager and a marketing associate for a small education technology platform. My job was to manage the dev team and dev tickets, to talk to the folks on our platform. They tended to be professors, administrators, deans, and students and TAs. So it was really cool to talk to that group of users, and then just run marketing initiatives. So that's where I, first just, decided, okay, I'm seeing issues with the product. I'm hearing voices about how they're using the product and what's happening with the product. But unfortunately, at that stage in my life, I couldn't pitch ideas to the founders. I didn't know how to translate those insights and what I was hearing into a tangible product recommendation. But I was starting to, pick up on UX and what UX is at that point.
So fascinating, so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey. And I'm sure there's so much of, your soul searching that had to go into that, brought you to where you are today. I mean, your energy really shines through on, being comfortable, and also being, happy about the decisions that you've made, or at least the way that you have been navigating these times, career pivoting. And then, what does it look like? You said 6 months ago, you all started this project. So, doing that during the pandemic, and seeing, how you have 3,000 people on your Slack. It's just like, it's proof that when we know ourselves, or we go into ourselves, and we have this, I don't know, midlife, quarter life, end of life, beginning of life crisis. And then we say, okay, what can I do, to really, you said you wanted to study voice and all that, but you're using your voice in another way. Of course, you're not training to be an opera singer, but you're using your voice in another way to, communicate. And I love that you're sharing your story with us. I'm going to now share some stories from our live callers here. I'm just going to go down the list, and then I'll ask you to reflect on any particular ones or in general. So Robin writes, I'm thinking about pivoting into UX, but it's very overwhelming to get started. Nader writes, thinking about and recently decided to start working towards acquiring the relevant experience and skills. Erica writes, also considering a transition into UX. Currently, I code, test, and deploy emails. Sudeshna writes, I'm an architect thinking about pivoting to UX UI, but I'm overwhelmed by the process and time required by the transition time. So hoping to learn about how to manage the transition with minimal disruption to my current career commitments. Awesome. Mrs. Davis writes, I shared as well, but maybe it wasn't seen. I'm thinking of pivoting as well. Perfect. So Mrs. Davis is thinking of pivoting as well. Anya writes, I am in recruitment and thinking about UX research, but a bit afraid of making the jump. Trinisha writes, transitioning from a fashion design educator, and I completed a boot camp through Skill Crush in UX and now working on gaining experience to land a full-time position. And Graham writes, attempting to pivot from an attorney role into a UX researcher role. So there you go. Samaya, please give us your feedback on these comments. And if you haven't had a chance yet to drop your comments, please do. And I will still raise that to our guest speaker's attention.
Wow, no, it's really great to hear where everyone's coming from. And I can completely resonate with the fact that people might be feeling anxious or scared to make a transition. It does take a lot of momentum to get yourself going. But I think you should also give yourself a chance to fail and experiment and try new things. And, not hold yourself to such strict, we always have this perception that we need to be something or we need to be a certain way because society tells us to. But I think the moment we get rid of how we think society should perceive us and we give ourselves room to explore and experiment a little bit, that's when we start to really see success and traction and make connections in a whole new field or career. So I'm trying to maybe respond more to the emotional side of these comments of the anxiety, the fear of the pandemic, but just the uncertainty of living in this pandemic. So what Christina and I have really tried to actively do in changing our mindset is, despite the chaos of this year and despite not, the uncertainty, we're trying to look at the silver lining. And to us, the silver lining is remote work. At this point in time, everyone's working remotely, and maybe that will change very soon with the vaccination in the US, but who knows, maybe remote work will last for another 6 months. But we took the opportunity of working remotely to set aside some time to start Ideate Labs and set aside some time to learn new skills. And I think this is such a great time to start learning and setting aside that time and achieving that work-life balance of doing a day job, but also taking time to invest in yourself and pick up new skills and then start to put them into practice. So the reason I'm saying it should be okay to fail is that startups think like that a lot. And startups are a great way to get your foot in the door into a UI UX career. There's fewer barriers to entry, and they like people who come from different backgrounds like law and graphic design and HR and recruitment. They want those types of thinkers, so you can very much more easily position yourself for those startup roles. And when you start to have that mindset of experimentation and being okay to fail, you're a shoe into a startup.
I love that you're highlighting mindset, and especially during these crazy times, because, if we can have a more, holistic way, more rooted way of identifying with ourselves and then sharing the work and the talent and the passion that we have with others, I think that we will be more comfortable in this chaos instead of like uncertain and I don't know and how do I do it. But the good thing is that we have voices like your voice, and folks who are passionate about helping people transition and build that bridge, build that, oh, your cat made a cameo, hi, to build that bridge, which is like, the logical side. My hope is that more people who build technology will be more in touch with their emotionally intelligent side, or at least try to develop that, so that we aren't just creating who knows what to then go out and affect the world, to be more in touch with ourselves and then put that into the work or the product and things like that. I would just love to hear you speak about emotional intelligence clearly, because you are alluding to it through these responses, which I love. But what is your opinion on emotional intelligence, and specifically in the workplace?
Oh, emotional intelligence is the core of design thinking, and it's the core of succeeding in the workplace. So even within UI UX, I would say half my job is to actually create a design or do the research around a design, but the other half of my job is to be collaborating with other designers and other teams. So I would say the other half of my job is being a salesperson for design, selling the design process to development teams, to marketing teams, to regulatory teams who don't understand what design thinking is or what is design in the first place, UX design. How does that different from UI design? So those are questions designers have to be able to answer on the fly. Another part of design is being an educator. So as you're bringing in and selling your designs to these other teams, you're also educating them on the process and why you're doing what you're doing. And that's what makes you a more effective designer. And especially right now, designers have a role at the business table. They're able to use the design thinking process and how empathy is so important to justify business decisions. And that's the key of combining design thinking with business strategy. So to go back to your point on empathy and empathy in the workplace, I think we're seeing with the pandemic that yes, we're maybe with work from home, we're able to get more of a work-life balance situation, or we're able to be more present with our families. But at the same time, there's a lack of empathy. Everyone is Zoom fatigued out. You're looking at screens all day. And even with, professionals, it's harder to empathize with your coworkers because you don't have those water cooler moments or those moments you could have happy hours together. So how do you, create that empathy again in a digital workforce and maintain those connections you have with your coworkers and employees, or anyone you work with? And design thinking plays such a big role because empathy is such a buzzword. People say that they have to be empathetic, but do we actually practice empathy? Do we actually listen to our users? Do we listen to our salespeople? Do we listen to the stakeholders? And a big part of user research, which is what I love about UX research, is that you take the time to listen to not only one person, but 10, 20 people, and then you synthesize that information and then come up with an insight or recommendation on how to move forward. So there's a lot we do in Ideate Labs around empathy and empathy exercises and practicing it as opposed to just using the buzzword empathy.
Yes, practice what you preach, especially because you're right, it's a buzzword. How do we get rid of these big isms, racism, sexism, all these things require time, and they require, you connecting with your emotional intelligence. In my opinion, I'm biased to emotional intelligence because I also studied theater and film, and I come from a space where it's like, if you don't connect with your emotional intelligence, then you're not doing your job. So
Yeah.
like, it's my job to learn how to connect with myself that way. And then so you do practice active listening, these things that could, bridge the world instead of creating more walls and division. And I find the digital space very interesting and very fertile, because it is a chance for us to build these bridges and to practice what we preach, as you're saying, and not just say, yeah, you know, we empathize with people, but then what's happening on the back end, or what's happening because as a result of the product being shared in the world. So I love that you're highlighting this. This is great. I do have another comment in the chat box that ends with a question. So maybe you can answer this question whenever you feel like whenever you feel like you can here. So I am dealing with elder care and transitioning from academia, history, and sociology. I'm returning to UX, involved in local and national UX groups. I'm wondering how to translate my old and other skills. Research is the way in, but I have managed products and teams.
Okay. 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 This is a really great start. I would say that it would be maybe highlighting some of your previous work in your portfolio. So if you've done sociology is such an amazing background to get into UX strategy and research. I would highlight the interview questions you ask as you're collecting insights and gathering data through qualitative research. That would be a great portfolio piece to showcase. And then I would also try to highlight and reposition some of your older job titles and just reframe it as a UX role. So maybe some of the sociology projects you've worked on, you could title yourself as a UX a researcher, or a qualitative researcher, or analyst. Anything that will help you make that transition more apparent to someone viewing your resume, because for a recruiter, they're only looking at your resume for 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds, and they just need to see those buzzwords, and they're not going to dive in deeper to see that you actually know what you're talking about. They just want to see the word UX strategist somewhere. So if you can title some of your older positions and highlight the research you've done in those other positions, that would position you well into UX, or start to position you.
Awesome. Yeah, like connecting the dots, because as you said, a lot of recruiters take, no time to a couple of seconds to figure out if they want to, follow up. So I love that you're saying make it easier, like find the connection so that they can say, oh yeah, this is worth putting to the side and giving a call. So thank you for that. All right, so let's move on to the next question here. What courses should you take to be able to make the pivot? And do you need any certifications?
So I would say you don't need any certifications, and my truthful answer is you don't need any courses. If you are someone who's a self-taught UX designer, there's so many of them out there. Christina and I taught each other and motivated each other. So we actually met at that startup job. We were the only two women on that startup team, and then we made the transition by creating portfolio pieces for ourselves and using YouTube and Google to help educate ourselves on how to create a design portfolio. And then we just talked our way into the, sorry about my cat. We just talked our way into the job and kept interviewing. And yes, we failed a lot of times and we fell on our face a lot of times, but we just kept going and pitching. What we did do is create a course that we hope helps folks to pivot into UI UX design as a career. So if you look at Ideate Labs, our website, we provide a 4-month program where you learn the end-to-end design process. What we noticed was a lot of folks pivoting into UI UX aren't even sure what the difference between UI and UX is, or they're not sure what type of UX job best suits their personality and their work style. So the first 2 months, we focus on UX research and strategy and how it relates to the business model of your product. So you get to choose a topic of your choice and build a product around a topic that you're passionate about. And then the next half of the course focuses on actually implementing those ideas, building a design system from scratch and creating that product from scratch. And so what we're trying to teach is how to create an end-to-end process from scratch, but this also helps you build up concepts you would need to position yourself as a senior UX designer. So if you can connect the dots between UX research and business strategy and how you're monetizing the product, or if you can connect the dots from a design perspective on how you build a design system from scratch. What does a style guide look like? What are templates within your product? Then you can start to even position yourself as a senior designer. So with our course, we provide a year-long access to the course, because there's no way you're going to learn UX in 4 months, and there's no way you can come up with 3 to 5 portfolio pieces in 4 months. So what we do is provide one amazing portfolio piece and then give you access to the course to position yourself for other pieces. We also give you a lot of networking and mentorship opportunities with startups at Wharton who really need designers. And so that's a great way to get your feet wet, and have a couple of projects under your belt so that you can position yourself for the first full-time job or the first gig that you would like to work in.
Wow, I love the support that you all offer. Is there, you don't have to answer this now, but maybe, I would love to hear if there's like a story that sticks out. Of course, you can keep the people involved anonymous, but is there something that just sticks out that you're like, wow, I want to show people that, yes, it's possible. And look at what these folks did because they participated in our course and all that jazz. Do you have anything that comes to mind now, or do you need a second to think?
Yes, so we have 11 brilliant students. Two of them have started out in the nonprofit space, and they actually used what they're passionate about, the communities that they would like to help, to create these amazing products. One of the products helps fill out an application for food stamps. And this is coming from a very personal place for one of our students. And he's creating the app and actually is about to implement the app. So not only does he want to finish the project, but he wants to turn this into a startup and actually help folks fill the application to get food stamps. So that we think is amazing. Another one of our students is working with housing applicants, especially single moms who get into the housing applicant world, and they don't ever feel empowered when they're in the housing situation, to do things on their own. They're given a lot of limitations, and they don't feel like their social worker is on their side. So she's trying to find a way to reframe that experience into empowerment. How do they help themselves, and how do they help others within their community so that they don't feel like they need to go to the social worker all the time? So that's another really cool project, and she's actually talking actively to nonprofits to get funding for this platform that she's designing. So we're so proud of her. Another student is more from the graphic design space, and she is working on reframing grief. How do we make and normalize grief? Especially now in this year, a lot of folks have lost loved ones, myself included, because of COVID. And it's not normalized to be even able to talk about it. No one is comfortable with the concept of grief. And how do we make them feel comfortable with just speaking what's going on with them, or asking for help, or how do we help manage grief in a better manner? So that has been a really complex project to tackle, especially from the research side, because if you imagine talking to folks who've just lost a loved one, that's a very challenging interview to do. And so it requires a lot of empathy, very real empathy, and a lot of tact to be able to go through those interviews.
Wow. I applaud everyone who is bringing their fullest self to the table to be able to tackle these big issues. I'm hearing food poverty, equal housing, gentrification, crises, instigate grief and things like that. So I know that sometimes we see technology as the superficial thing that like is entertainment or makes things easier, but like when you really get to hear some of these stories, that's why I thank you for highlighting some of those journeys that stick out for you. Because I know that we all have things that we want to do. Some of us want to change the world by, not just, deciding one thing over the other. We want to like maybe build something to then share with the world. So I love that you're offering that to your students. And we've got folks in the chat box saying that that's amazing. And so, yes, I love that. Thank you again for sharing. So we have some folks who are writing in the chat box. Let's try to go through some of these comments here. Do you see accessibility as a big need within UX?
Yes, definitely. And I would say my partner, Christina, can actually speak much better than I can to accessibility from a UI standpoint. So she covers the idea of voice design. So even text-based, technologies are not enough. Imagine a mom with a kid on her shoulder pushing a stroller or, a pram, also having to manage running a business, which is exactly what Christina is doing right now. And we swear by voice text because all we do back and forth every day is just talk to each other on the voice text, system. That's a great way for moms to multitask. And another way, I'm just stealing Christina's words because she's better at talking about this, is imagine if disabilities are not or are like you could be designing for a temporary disability. So for example, being pregnant, becoming a mother, that's a 9-month temporary disability where your body is changing, your physicality is changing. And for Christina, that was a moment where she realized, okay, I now can truly empathize with how someone with disabilities must feel or have to walk through a space not designed for them. And so she talks about how being 9 months pregnant, you're kind of having to climb steps versus taking a ramp. That made a big difference to her, when she was pregnant with her first child. And that temporary disability moment for her really changed her mind on accessibility and the importance of accessibility on my end, I've worked with a startup with Parkinson's patients, so folks who have disabilities and are slowly losing their muscular capabilities. And I've gone to Inglis House here in Philadelphia, which is a home for folks with disabilities, people who can't use their fingers to type on keyboards, or folks who have to use their eyes and eye tracking to write up a message. And so there's a lot of really interesting technologies for a whole spectrum of disabilities. But I would defer to Christina. I really wish she was here to answer your question in more detail. I hope I did justice though.
Yes, I understand. And Robin, let us know if we need to clarify a little more, or maybe we can find you after this conversation and continue the conversation there. That would be nice. We do have a comment here from Trinicia, who writes, "Can you recommend a resume writer that specializes in UX to help folks who are transitioning?" And we did get some folks writing, some folks who are resume writers and it has worked for them. But do you have any that you recommend as well, or can you send someone to a particular place?
So I don't have any resume writers off the top of my head. What we do with Ideate Labs is we take the last 2 weeks of the program to help folks position themselves for UX. So we work with them on their portfolio as well as their resume. And with the resume, it's so personalized because we have to talk through each of your past experiences to reframe each of those experiences and rewrite the job description and the title that you had. So that's what the approach we've been taking with our students. Every week we meet for a group lecture, but we also meet one-on-one for an hour to talk through that personalized element. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't have a resume writer.
But it's nice to hear that you continue to walk your students through the process, so that you don't just send them off into the wolves after it. You have this intentional moment to talk about the resume and to just develop it a little more together. So that's good news as well.
We actually also, because we're in the industry ourselves and we're constantly learning, design is a field where you constantly have to learn. So every designer right now who's a senior designer or principal designer is learning about the new technologies coming up: voice-based systems, voice-based design, AI, AR, VR. So you have to constantly be learning, which also means we're constantly applying ourselves to positions. And actually what I provide my students is my resume template. And I've gone through about 30 resume templates, and I've A/B tested a lot of different resume templates. And actually that A/B testing has been crucial in finding the template that's led to success. So one of my templates has gotten me 15 job interviews in 2 weeks. And what I did was I DM'd 300 startups to do that. And so part of it is DMing and being very persistent about how you communicate and how you personalize your DMs or your emails to certain jobs. And the other half of it is A/B testing. So if you have a question on what resume or what title will work better, A/B test it.
That's great. That's great. I'm really fascinated by your the integrity that you have as well. It's like, let me just take my resume, change it up a little bit, and see which one works better. And then your results are fascinating as well. You're able to get 15 callbacks from sending 300 direct messages. So I love that. Hopefully that gives someone encouragement to do the same. Okay, so let's move on to this next question here. I'm not a graphic designer, but I'm very interested in UX content roles, but can't find many. And when I do find them, they require a design background. Can I land a UX role without a design background?
Yes, you can. I did that too. I made the transition from mechanical engineer to startup customer success manager to UX researcher. But it's also about reframing your past experiences to suit the UX world and to suit recruiters looking to place UX strategists and content strategists. So our job when we're writing our resume and portfolio is to make it easy for the recruiters to connect the dots, to not have to connect the dots. You should do the dot connecting and show how your past experience is so crucial to you being a successful content writer or content strategist. One of our students at Ideate Labs, he used to work at Vice, and he used to create beautiful documentaries and write amazing articles and interview folks for the radio. And he's using that background to position himself as a UX strategist. So it's all about how you frame your old jobs, your previous experiences.
And I love that, to connect the dots first so that the other person doesn't have to connect the dots. And you can be more intentional about what you want to come back to you as well, right? Because I know that at least for folks who come from very diverse backgrounds, and maybe you have, you are the Jack or the Jane of all trades, and it's like, how do I let them know that I'm good for this? How do you change up some of those titles, or add a little more language to make the experience really shine through written, when someone's looking at it for 30 seconds. So I love that you're highlighting that as well. Let's move on to this next question here. What steps do you suggest for taking in UX type of tasks while you're in your current non-UX position?
That's a really great question. I would say the first step is to really identify a gap or problem in a current process at your job, or the way things are done, and then to help solve the problem with UX principles. So that way you can have a clear portfolio piece that showcases the problem, the solution, and the process you use to create those solutions. If you go on Ideate Labs website, you'll see some of our student portfolios, and that's the layout or template that we use to really highlight that they are creative problem solvers. So for me, really, the title of UX strategist or UX researcher or UX designer or product designer doesn't mean much, because all of us ultimately are creatively solving problems. And the more you can showcase that, the better you're able to position yourself in the field of UI UX. So I would start by, talking to as many team members from across teams to come up with an interdisciplinary solution, perhaps. And by talking to those different teams, you can highlight that research of the ability to manage different stakeholders and to talk across teams and bring teams together. And that's such a crucial skill. Another thing I would think about doing is running an ideation session with the teams, because design is never done alone or in a box. So it's not you just collecting all these great insights and then designing something by yourself and then presenting it to the world. It's about getting buy-in for those solutions. So it's about a co-creation process, and it's about inviting others to put in their thoughts and contribute to this idea, so that everyone is on board with the idea. So the more you can do that, the more successful the implementation of your solution would be.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so everyone knows we've got a little over 15 minutes left. So in just a moment, I'm going to invite folks who want to hop off mute, and maybe you have some questions or reflections that you'd like to ask with your voice. So be ready for that. I've written here in the chat box, you can raise your emoji hand or you can hop off mute when that time comes. But I just want to let you know now, so you can start to think, do I want to come off mute? Do I want to ask my question? Because we would love to hear from you. But until then, let's tackle this big question here. What does the UX interview process look like?
Very good question. So that would depend on what type of job you're applying to. Are you applying to a startup job, an agency job, or a corporation? If it's a corporation, the interview process is going to be a lot more formal. You might go through multiple rounds of interviews. It might start with a screener from a recruiter, and they might pass you along to the HR manager of that company, who would then screen you again and pass you on to the design manager. You might have a 30-minute call with the design manager, and then they might pass you along for a fourth interview to team members within the UI UX team, and how you fit with the team. If they know you're capable at this point, it's more about the fit is, will everyone get along? So that's the corporate process. But if it's a startup process, it might be a lot more informal. It might be you reaching out directly to the co-founders of the startup and having a call with each of them or all of them, and then just getting, a call back on, yes, please begin, or no, try again. And then if you're looking to go into agency work, that would be kind of an in-between process, where you might talk to a recruiter or hiring manager. You might even have to complete a design challenge, and then you might be introduced to the team, or you might be placed on a client project, or a contract project to sort of prove yourself and showcase your talent before you're hired full-time. So there might be a trial period as well.
Awesome. Thank you for highlighting the different kinds of buckets that one can drop in or apply to, when it comes to the realm of, the startup or the corporate. So before let's say someone gets hired for a contract role, to see, how that works. Can you speak a little bit about, that trial period, what someone should expect? How can they negotiate, let's say, the trial period? And also, before that trial period even happens, when someone asks for a test, or I think you used it as a design challenge,
Yeah.
Should that be paid? Should it not be paid? How does someone walk around that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the design challenge should be framed in a way that it's not adding value to the company in any way. It should be a generic challenge. So think about redesigning Spotify if that company is not Spotify, or think about, a product that you use very a lot and why you use that product and redesign it. So those are more open-ended questions where the company is not getting direct value out of you solving the challenge. I would be a little weary of companies who come to you with their problem and ask you to solve it for them or to redesign a part of their platform as the challenge, because then they're essentially getting a little bit of free work out of you. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. But and maybe you can then use that as a portfolio piece. And you get something out of it as well. But that's something to think about and be wary of. I would also be wary of the amount of time you're spending. So a design challenge should be short and sweet. It should be no more than 2 to 4 hours long maximum. You shouldn't be spending 1 to 2 weeks on a large challenge. And I've had to do design challenges myself. So for companies like McKinsey Design or Bain and Company, those are big companies that they would want to see a challenge, especially if you're getting to the final rounds of the interview. But there's also agencies that do small design challenges. I would say when you start out in the contract role and it's a 3-month contract, you should constantly be finding opportunities to extend your contract or new projects. You're constantly, as a freelancer, scoping out what the next project is based on what the client needs. And if you have that skill of scoping out, okay, now that this project is complete, they need to be thinking about X, Y, Z. And if you can articulate that to the agency or you can articulate that to the client, then you're more likely to be called back in a couple of months. So this is a great, way of being a freelancer, as well as how can you always get a recurring system going with a certain client so that they're coming back to you every 6 months, every year.
I love that. Thank you so much for those tips and tricks. It's very helpful. I have my sister-in-law is she works in UX design. I don't know really what she does, but I think she creates magic kingdoms. I don't know. And I hear her saying these same things, kind of like she'll be looking for someone to do a test and she'll be like checking in with the CEO, like we need to make sure we pay them because blah blah blah. This is their time. Like so having that advocacy as well. I mean I hear just from hearing her conversations seems to be important as well. So can you speak a little bit to how can we advocate for each other, especially if people are working freelance or, if people want a career pivot? How can we just make this more inclusive and less of this, competitive, linear, one-sided kind of like black or white, yes or no field?
Yeah, I've noticed actually designers are very collaborative by nature, because the style of design, you can't be designing individually. You have to be bringing in so many other ideas to even have a successful design in the first place. So designers by nature tend to be a little bit more social and collaborative. I've very rarely met designers who go away and hide in a black hole and create a design. And they might be brilliant, but they still need that feedback. So collaboration is just the key to everything here. And sure, yeah, advocating for other designers. I've always, when I first started out in user research, I was at an agency, so I was really blessed because I had other researchers, 5 or 6 other researchers who were within my team that I could shadow whenever I had non-billable hours. So whenever I wasn't on a client project of my own, I was shadowing every other researcher I could find, and I was coming up with my own style of doing things. So that was what really helped me define my style as a user researcher, especially because UX research does involve a lot of soft skills. So it's very much about your interview style and how you talk to people. And I can't talk to people like my design manager would, because he's a completely different person. But maybe I could talk to people in a more soft spoken way because that's more my style. And so I had to end up being authentic to my style. And the more you can find people who can teach you new skills, but also help you become authentic to yourself, that's when you're really building up your confidence in the field, and you're overcoming that imposter syndrome. And find multiple mentors, because honestly, in this day and age, there's no one person who has the time and bandwidth to dedicate an hour a week to meet. So what I ended up doing was, in that job, I found 5 different people that I would hit up each week. And so if I scheduled, a call once a month, which each of them, I would have someone new to talk to each week. And I was getting so many new perspectives. And the more perspectives I got on the field of UX research, the better I was able to create a style that was authentic to myself.
I love that. I love the authenticity piece because hopefully more folks will join teams or work on their own projects and bring their full self and be as authentic as possible so that we can just break some of these paradigms that have been historically put into place, intentionally put into place to keep people out. So I know I'm diving deep there, but let's be more authentic, folks. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and I would love to see if anyone wants to hop off of mute to voice their question or reflection. So I'll hold for a light pause to give space and time for that. Let's see if someone wants to take that pause and hop off of mute. Sometimes it works. If not, I have more questions I can ask. Or we can ask your cat, who definitely wants more cameos. I think your cat wants to speak, speak
Finally
about.
resting. She's like finally calmed down. She's like, okay, I won't be on camera. It's fine.
She's like, what are they doing in there? It's like, you're taking her away from me. She's trying to knock everything over. I love when cats make cameos in the Zoom fatigue is real, but when cats make cameos, that makes me happy. Okay, so we do have a question here from Robin. How do I start building my portfolio, especially if I don't have a design background?
That's a really good question. I would start by repositioning existing work that you're doing to start your portfolio. So let's say you have creative projects like photography or art and painting. I would definitely put those up as different portfolio pieces because it shows that you have a visual eye and that you have that visual know-how. But then I would start to reframe existing work that you're doing at your job, whether it's writing copy for a website, or it's looking at the website and finding ways to optimize it, or it's looking at gaps in a process and talking to different stakeholders on different teams and then coming up with a solution that everyone agrees on. That's an amazing UX project to have. So that would be a good way to start to gain some projects. The next thing I would do will be to take a free course. So as much as I can, I like to read UX Collective. I like to read Smashing Magazine. I like to go on Slack channels to see the resources other people are talking about. And then there's also Google's free UX course on Coursera. So that's a very great starting point. I've heard from some of my students that it's a great starting place, but you have to be self-motivated to keep going. And it doesn't teach you the details of UX. It's a great overview of UX, but if you want to dive deep, I would then consider taking a course, whether it's a boot camp, whether it's Ideate Labs. Of course, I will be biased always about Ideate Labs courses, or maybe for you, it's grad school. Maybe it's a chance to really dive deep into a 2-year program. Maybe it's an MBA. So it's really on your learning style. Are you a self-taught, self-paced learner? Are you someone who needs that hybrid boot camp course, online course approach? Or are you someone who needs to go to grad school and really dedicate the time to it? It's really, what's most meaningful to you at the end of the day?
Again, going back to the you piece, right? Being authentic to yourself, what works for you? How can it not just be like, you're selling your soul to be able to pivot careers and, giving yourself that leeway and grace period as well by being authentic, saying what you need. Hopefully you get that, or, you figure out ways to navigate that and test, right? And experiment. As you said, you sent DMs to 300 folks with different resumes, and then you landed some things, and then you started this great project. So your journey definitely has been an inspiration to hear for me. And I hope that people are able to be inspired by your story as well, and maybe join a course or two that you have at your project. So we have about 6 minutes left. There is one question here that I would love for you to touch on. You have been speaking about this, but this is a very specific question that speaks to ageism, and that comes up often in the workspace and folks trying to navigate that. So this question reads, can you get into UX in your late 30s after a career in marketing and graphic design, or is it realistically too late to start?
It is never too late to start, never ever. And actually, one of our students is so talented. She's had over 10, 15 years of experience in graphic design. She's also had I think 2 to 3 years of experience in quality assurance engineering. So she's worked with dev teams to test digital products. And because she's sitting at that beautiful intersection of graphic design and QA, she's a brilliant UX designer. So her project has been amazing. It's a holistic health app for women. That's what she created within Ideate Labs. And she hands down is so ready to not only position herself as a UX designer, but to position herself as a senior UX designer, because she's so professional. She's held the title of art director in her previous roles. She knows how to manage teams. She has a lot of empathy and a lot of emotional intelligence. And that's the kind of skill you need ultimately to get you to the senior level role. So I would say maybe you should be considering a senior UX designer role once you've taken a couple of courses and feel confident that you can make the pivot.
Yes, way to flip the script there. It's like, no, it's not only that you should apply, you should look for these, higher roles. So I really appreciate that as well, because I don't think that most people speak that authentically about, it's like, maybe you should take some more courses, or maybe you should, think about something else. It's like, no, you can do it. And actually, maybe you can get that senior position.
I think it's sad because we always place ourselves in a box and we tell ourselves we can't do something. And for me, the reason I started my company when I was in grad school, I always thought, okay, maybe after grad school, I'll become a UX manager, or I'll become a leader in a UX team. And then I met a mentor who met with me every week over a summer for 2 hours. And she's like, why aren't you starting your own company? Like, what's wrong with you? I see that you can do it. Why aren't you doing it? And it took me hearing that so many times and having her as a mentor to really push me into an unknown world where I had never considered that I could be successful. So sometimes it's about meeting that one mentor who will push you and tell you, don't put yourself in that box. She broke me out of my box. So I think we try and do that for all of our students. Never put yourself in a box.
I love that. So you're speaking a little bit about imposter syndrome. I would love for you to rant a little bit more about imposter syndrome. It's because especially as folks are career pivoting, and especially as they're like, okay, how do I figure out how to put the pieces of the puzzle together to connect the dots and then share to the, hiring manager. And of course you feel, well, first, I've heard people that say, I don't believe in imposter syndrome. So I shouldn't say that we all believe in imposter syndrome. So first, do you believe in imposter syndrome? I guess is my first question. And then two, what do you have to say about imposter syndrome, and how can people navigate those waters?
I definitely believe in imposter syndrome. And yes, it's very real to me. I actually think there's a good side to imposter syndrome. It's what keeps me honest. And it's what tells me, it's that thing at the back of my head that tells me I don't know enough, so that I'm constantly learning, and I'm a lifelong learner. So even now, when Christina and I have held the title of senior UX designer, we still feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, because now we're teaching a course. We're responsible for educating our students, which means we definitely have to keep learning and be on top of the newest trends all the time. And we hold ourselves accountable to doing that because of our imposter syndrome. I would say imposter syndrome is bad when it puts you in a box and when it limits you to, reach for opportunities. So imposter syndrome is not helping you or hindering you when you're telling yourself, oh, maybe I cannot apply to that job, or maybe I'm not fit for this role at a company, or maybe I cannot do something. The moment imposter syndrome is getting you to do that, that's when it's bad, and you need to break out of it and say, no, I can. It could just be an experiment. And the way I've broken out of my imposter syndrome is through amazing mentors, but also through just experimentation and being completely okay to fail, like fall on my face. So recently, my newest resume experiment has been titling myself as design director and sending it out to companies. And internally, I'm like, oh, I'm not a design director. There's no way I could be a design director. But then someone actually called me back for an interview, and they're like, oh, it sounds like you would be a great design director. You're a little low on experience, but it seems like you could, that's totally fine. And so now they're hiring me or considering me for my potential as opposed to who I am in this moment. And the more you can find people who would hire you for your potential rather than looking at what you don't have, those are the people to go for, because you can tell when you're on the interview and people are looking at what you lack, then you know that for the rest of the job and for the rest of your time on that role, they're constantly going to look at what you lack and they're not looking at your strengths. So look for the managers who play to your strengths, because you'll be happier at the end of the day.
Yes, I was just going to ask for some food for thought, but I think that you definitely gave us a well-rounded food for thought to not shortchange ourselves, to make sure that we use any kind of imposter syndrome to lead us into this awareness that we are going to be learning forever and to be able and willing to experiment. I love the way that you show this, that you're experimenting with your resume or you're experimenting with creating, projects and teaching and things like that. So thank you so much. We are at our time right now, and I see we do have more questions coming in the chat box. So how can folks find you when we finish this conversation? And I would encourage folks, if you still have questions, to reach out to Samaya on, however she's going to connect. Perfect. She's got her website here. I'm not sure if you want to share any socials or things like that, but now would be the time. Let us know how we can connect with you when we finish this conversation. And again, thank you so much for dropping so much knowledge and being so encouraging on this call.
Yeah, no worries. You can find us at ideatelabs.co. If you click on Slack, the link, you can join our community. Khrys and I always take the time to respond to anyone with questions on Slack, and LinkedIn as well. Those are in the bio on our website. So we're really hoping we can see you on Slack, because that's how I'm always on Slack.
Slack is popping for you. Great. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. I know we went a little over time, but I really appreciate everyone's engagement. Thank you, Samaya, for your encouragement, for the food for thought that you left us with to ponder on. And I hope that everyone can go and support the great work that she's doing. I will for sure. I've been inspired. And good luck to everyone who's applying. You can do it. Bring your best self. Develop your emotional intelligence and reach out to us. That we are here for you. We're here to bounce ideas off of each other and do some low-key mentorship. I think that's okay to say too. All right. So we'll see you all later. Bye.